You will find, Your Grace, that I am precisely the woman you require. The words fell into the long silence of the library at Westdale like a stone into a still pond, and Esmond, Duke of Westdale, did not so much as lift his eyes from the ledger open across his knee. He had heard the sentence, in one shape or another, 29 times since the frost had first laced the windows a fortnight past. Every candidate arrived with it polished and ready, a coin worn smooth by handling, and every candidate believed herself the first to think of it. The 30th of them stood now before the great cold hearth, her gloved hands folded exactly the angle her governess had once taught her, her chin lifted to the degree that flattered without defying, and she waited for the Duke to be pleased. He was not pleased. He was seldom pleased, and he had long since stopped pretending otherwise. "Miss Farrow," he said, and turned a page without haste, "you have told me that you admire the estate, that you find its history noble, that you esteem discretion above every virtue, and that you would count it the honor of your life to serve in this house. You have told me all of this within the space of 4 minutes." He raised his gaze at last, and it was the gaze that had unseated ministers and silenced dinner tables the length of 3 counties, grey, unhurried, and entirely without warmth. "You have not once told me anything I did not already wish to hear. Good day." The colour went out of Miss Farrow's face and then rushed back into it, high and mottled. She dropped a curtsy that trembled at the knee, and she went, and the tall doors closed behind her with the soft, final click that Esmond had come to know as the punctuation of his own wariness. He set the ledger aside and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. Beyond the diamond-paned glass the park lay under a thin skin of December mist, the bare limes marching down toward the lake in ranks as orderly as anything he had ever commanded, and none of it, not the acres, not the marble, not the name older than the conquest that he carried like a yoke of iron, none of it had ever once told him the truth. That he had come to believe was the peculiar curse of a great house. A man might own the whole of the visible world and remain the last person within it ever to be told a thing he did not want to hear. It had not always been so. There had been a time, 7 years gone, when Esmond had believed that a man of rank might be loved plainly, might be met without calculation, might trust the warmth held out to him across a candlelit table. Her name had been Cecilia, and she had smiled at him with her whole face and told him she cared nothing for his title, and he had married her believing it, and within the year he had found the letters. Not to a lover, he might almost have borne a lover, but to her sister, in her own hand, laughing at the great dull Duke she had landed, cataloguing his estates like a shopkeeper's inventory, counting the days until she might be a widow rich and free. She had died of a fever before she could be either. He had buried her with all the honor her rank demanded and had learned, once and for all, the price of believing a pleasant face. Since that winter he had trusted no smile offered to him, for a smile was the cheapest thing in England, and the whole World War I when a duke walked into the room, which was why the matter of the household had become, in these grey weeks, so wearisome a torment. "That is 30, said a dry voice from the doorway, and Esmond did not need to look up to know his steward had entered. Harmon Pell had served the house 29 years, first the late Duke and now the son, and he carried the ledger of the estate's soul as carefully as he carried its accounts. 30 women, Your Grace, and by my reckoning you have dismissed 29 of them inside the quarter hour and the last inside 4 minutes, which I believe to be a record even for you. They tell me lies, Pell. They tell you what any sensible woman tells a duke who might raise her fortune with a word." Pell crossed to the fire and stirred it, for the room was cold. Esmond kept it cold on purpose, having observed long ago how much a warm room encouraged people to linger and dissemble. "You require a companion and governess for Lady Amelia. The child is 8 years old, and has not spoken a full sentence to a living soul since her mother." He stopped himself, as he always did, at the edge of that ground. The position wants filling before the season. You cannot interview the whole of the female population of England looking for a woman who will not flatter you. You will run out of England. Esmond rose and went to the window. Down on the gravel sweep a carriage was drawing away, Miss Farrow's, no doubt, bearing her back to whatever ambitious mother had launched her, and behind it, standing apart near the mounting block where no carriage waited at all, was a figure he had not marked before. A young woman, plainly dressed. That was the first thing his eye told him, and the eye of a duke reads dress the way a scholar reads Latin, instantly and without effort. Her pelisse was grey and much mended, honestly mended, the stitches small and even at the elbow where the wool had worn. Her bonnet was 3 seasons out of any fashion he could name. She carried no reticule of consequence and no maid at all. She had not come by carriage. She stood in the December cold with her hands quiet before her and her face lifted not toward the house, as all the others had lifted theirs, greedy for its grandeur, but toward the limes and the mist beyond, as though she found the trees the more worthwhile company. "Who is that?" Esmond asked. Pell came to the glass. "Ah, that would be the 31st. A Miss Salter, John Salter, if the letter has it right. She came on the carrier's cart from Aldecott this morning, and has been waiting since 10 o'clock, having no appointed hour. Because Mrs. Dunn could not bring herself to turn her away in the cold, and could not bring herself to admit her either, the applications being closed at 30. The steward's mouth twitched with something that was very nearly amusement. The housekeeper is in a state of some confusion over it. The young woman will not go, and will not press. She simply waits and thanks the kitchen maid for every cup of tea, and asks for nothing. On the carrier's cart, Esmond watched her. The mist had begun to bead on the shoulders of the grey pelisse, silvering the worn wool, and she did not draw back beneath the portico to spare it. From Aldecott, that is 9 miles. 11, your grace, by the low road, which is the only road a carrier keeps. 11 miles on an open cart in December, to stand in the cold outside the closed door of a house that had already interviewed 30 women and wanted no more. It was, Esmond thought, either the act of a fool or the act of someone who had no other road left to walk, and in his experience the two were far more often distinguished by their outcomes than by anything visible from a library window. A fool made a great noise of her arriving. This one had made none. She had simply come as far as her fare would carry her and then stood, in the way of a person who has learned that the world does not owe her a door, and who means to knock all the same. Her references, he said. Pell hesitated, which Pell did not often do. There is a difficulty there. She served 4 years in the house of the late Sir Rowland Wexcombe as companion to his daughters. A good house, a decent house, and there is no fault laid against her, none whatever. But when Sir Rowland died, the estate passed to his brother, and the brother's wife. He drew a careful breath. The new Lady Wexcombe wrote the girl's character herself, and she wrote it thin, very thin. A few cold lines that say the barest true thing and let the reader supply the poison. That she was adequate, that she presumed above her station in the matter of the young lady's education, that she was, in short, dismissed without a place to go to, presumed above her station in the matter of education. Esmond turned the phrase over. There was a whole history in it, and it was not a history that flattered the pen that wrote it, meaning she taught the daughters something their new stepmother had not the wit to teach them, and was punished for the comparison. I could not say, your grace, but the steward's silence said it for him. Esmond looked down again at the small grey figure by the mounting block. She had turned now at some sound from the stable yard, and for a moment her face came up toward the light, a plain enough face by the reckoning of the drawing-rooms, unpowdered, wind-reddened at the cheek, framed by dark hair that had escaped its pins in the 11 cold miles. But there was something in the set of it that arrested him, and he stood at the window a moment longer than he meant to, trying to name the thing. It came to him at last. She did not look hungry. Every other face that crossed his threshold this fortnight had worn hunger somewhere in it, however well-schooled, hunger for the place, for the coin, for the assent, for the great man's good opinion. This one wore none. She looked like a woman who had already lost the things that could be lost, and had discovered, on the far side of that loss, that she was still herself, and that it was enough to go on with. "Send her away," said Pell gently, reading his master's stillness and mistaking it. "It is not kindness to keep her standing. I will have Mrs. Dunn give her a warm meal and the carrier's fare back to Aldecott, and a shilling besides, and no more said. The list is full. The list is full of liars," Esmond said. He did not turn from the window. Below him the mist thickened. A groom crossed the gravel with a lantern already lit, though it wanted an hour of dark, and the light of it swung across the grey pelisse and was gone. Somewhere above him, in the nursery wing where the fires were kept high and the curtains drawn against the world, An 8-year-old girl sat with a picture book open on her knee and had not spoken a full sentence in 14 months, not to a nurse, not to her tutor, not to the father who came each evening and sat with her in a silence that felt to him like a hand closing slowly around his heart. 30 women he had summoned to break that silence, and 30 had told him what a fine thing it would be to serve so noble a house, and not one of them had asked him the only question that mattered, which was what the child was like. Pell, he said. The 30 women. In all their 4 minutes and their fine words, did any of them once ask after Lady Amelia, what she cares for, what frightens her, whether she laughs? Anything of the child herself and not the child's fortune. The steward was quiet a long moment. "No, your grace," he said at last. "I do not believe one of them did." "No." Esmond's jaw tightened. "They asked after the salary and the rooms and the standing of the position in the county. They admired my library and my horses and my discretion. They came to be governess to a duke's daughter, every one of them, and not one of them came to be anything to the daughter." He set his hand flat against the cold glass. Down below, Joan Salter had shifted her weight. She had been standing 4 hours, he reminded himself, on the carrier's fare and a stranger's tea, and drawn her thin pelisse the smallest degree closer, and turned her face once more, patiently, toward the trees. "Bring her in." Pell did not move. "Your Grace, the character. I read the character. A thin poisoned page from a woman who profited by the girl's disgrace. I have read a good deal of poison in my life, Pell, and I have learned to tell it from ink." He straightened, and the wariness went out of his bearing and something older and harder took its place, the thing that made men who had never met him afraid of his name. 30 women told me I am a great and noble master and asked me nothing. I find I am curious to meet the one who has stood 4 hours in the cold, and asked me nothing either, but for a very different reason, I think. Bring her in, and Pell," he paused, "do not warn her. Do not tell her I am out of temper, or that the list is closed, or that she had best flatter the trees off the lawn if she wishes a place. Tell her nothing. I wish to see what she does when no one has told her what I want." The steward inclined his head, in the particular way that had meant, for 29 years, both obedience and reservation held in careful balance, and withdrew. Esmond heard the doors, and heard his own heart, which he had thought long past being troubled by anything so slight as the arrival of a servant, beating with an attention he did not care to examine. He returned to the great chair beside the cold hearth, and took up the thin character letter from the salver where Pell had left it. Lady Wexcombe's few cold lines, the poison and the ink, presumed above her station in the matter of the young lady's education. He had known women like the one who wrote that line. The county was thick with them, and they governed their small worlds by a single ruthless law, which was as that no one beneath them should ever be permitted to shine, lest the light fall unflatteringly upon themselves. A governess who taught too well, who woke a dull heiress to Latin or to figures or to some quickness the stepmother lacked, was not a treasure to such a woman. She was a rebuke. And a rebuke, in a house where the purse had newly changed hands, was turned out into December roads with 4 cold lines to follow her wherever she sought bread. He wondered what it was she had taught them, the Wexcombe daughters, to earn so careful a hatred. He wondered, and found the wondering itself remarkable, for he had not been curious about another living soul in a very long while. Curiosity was a door, and Esmond had spent 7 years learning to keep his doors shut and barred against the draught of other people, who wanted things, who lied, who smiled. That a grey figure on a mounting block should have set a hand to the latch of him from 11 miles off was not a thing he welcomed. It was merely a thing he could not, at this particular hour of this particular grey afternoon, seem to prevent. He read the letter once more while the sound of the far door and the murmur of the hall came up to him, and a lighter step than he expected crossed the marble toward the library. He did not rise. Dukes did not rise for governesses, and he had learned that a man revealed a great deal by what he did in the moment before he knew he was being watched. He wished to watch first. The doors opened. Joan Salter came in 3 steps and stopped, and she did not sweep the room with the appraising, hungry glance he had grown so tired of, did not price the teaching above the shelves, nor count the leather spines, nor calculate, in the manner of the 30, exactly how far she had risen merely by standing in such a room. She looked once quickly at the cold and empty grate, And then she looked at him, directly, the way one person looks at another when there is a matter between them to be settled honestly. And Esmond, who had built his whole life since Cecilia upon the certainty that no one ever looked at a duke and saw a man, felt the ledger-cold habit of 7 years go still within him, all at once, like a clock stopped between one stroke and the next. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was low and even, roughened faintly by the cold, entirely without tremor. "They tell me the position is filled, and that I ought not to be here at all. I have come 11 miles on a slow cart to hear it, and I would rather hear it from you than from the corner of a housekeeper's apron. So I will not waste your afternoon telling you what a fine house you keep." She drew a breath. Her chin came up, not in defiance and not in the practiced flattering degree, but simply as a woman gathers herself to speak plainly to a man who frightens everyone he meets. "I will ask you instead. Your daughter, is she very unhappy? Because I think that is the only reason a man such as you would sit through 30 women, and I do not believe a single one of them has told you the truth about anything, least of all that." The 30th of them curtsied her way out of the long gallery in a rustle of watered silk, and Esmond, Duke of Westdale, sat very still behind the great desk and permitted himself at last to close his eyes. They had all been the same. Not in feature, for some were dark and some were fair, and one had worn a bonnet so elaborately feathered his steward, Mr. Pell, had been obliged to look at his shoes to keep his countenance. But in the thing that mattered they had been identical. 30 women poured from a single mood, and the mood was flattery. They had praised his house. They had praised his horses, seen only from the drive. 3 of them had praised the late Duchess, whom none had met and who had loved neither him nor the child she left behind. Every one of them had told him that Lady Amelia must be the sweetest, the cleverest, the most biddable little creature in the county, though not one had so much as glimpsed his daughter through a doorway. And Amelia at 7 was neither biddable nor sweet-tempered when she was frightened, which was often now. He had learned a long while since and at bitter cost what a smooth tongue concealed. A man did notch his position without being courted for it, and Esmond had been courted once in earnest by a beautiful woman who had smiled and agreed and admired until the ring was on her finger and the settlements signed, and who had then looked at him across a breakfast table as at a piece of furniture she had purchased and found dull. He had buried her 3 years past and mourned, to his shame, chiefly the loss of the hope he had wasted on her. Since then he trusted agreement least of all things. A person who told him only what pleased him was a person measuring the depth of his purse. "There is one more, Your Grace," Mr. Pell said, consulting his list with the air of a man apologizing for it. "A Miss Salter. She came without a letter of introduction of any weight, a former situation with a clergyman's widow, lately deceased, and a line from the parish. I confess I nearly sent her away. She has been these 4 hours in the passage. 4 hours." Esmond opened his eyes. The others were shown to the morning room and given tea. She would not take the chair by the fire that Mrs. Dunn offered. Said the passage did very well, and she should not like to crowd the ladies who had a better claim. Pell hesitated. "She is not, Your Grace will see. She is not of the same order as the rest." "Send her in," Esmond said, and did not know why the words came a shade too quickly. She came in without any rustle at all, and that was the first thing he marked, for silk announces itself and Joan Salter's gown made no announcement. It was grey, plainly cut, worn thin at the cuffs and mended at one shoulder with stitches fine, that only a man who had spent his idle youth watching his mother's needlewoman would have known it for a mend. She was not beautiful in the way the room had been full of beauty that morning. She was something he had no ready word for. She stopped at a proper distance from the desk, folded her hands, and looked at him, not up at him, not sidelong through her lashes, but directly the way one honest person looks at another to take his measure and let herself be taken. "Miss Salter," he said. "Your Grace." She inclined her head. She did not tell him it was an honor. She did not tell him anything at all, but waited composed for him to begin, and the silence lasted a beat longer than he had intended, because for the first morning in a week he had not been handed his opening line. "You have waited a long time in a cold passage," he said. "The others were given tea. I heard them given it." A small, unhurried smile. "The passage was warmer than the room I left this morning, Your Grace, so I was very comfortable. and a person who cannot wait quietly for 4 hours would make a poor governess. Children make one wait for a great deal longer than that, and reward it far less certainly than tea. It was not what he had meant to draw from her, and it undid, very slightly, the fixed set of his jaw. He had asked 30 women that morning why they sought the post, and had been told 30 times of their reverence for the family, their devotion to the young and innocent, their long dream of a house such as his. He asked her the same, more curtly than he had asked the rest, to see whether the plainness would hold under the weight of the great desk, and the great room and the great name. "Why do you seek this place, Miss Salter?" "'Cause I need it," Joan Salter said. The words fell into the long gallery like a dropped coin and rang. Behind her, near the door, Esmond saw Mr. Pell stiffen, waiting for the recovery, the swift and pretty amendment, but for love of the work, of course. Above all, for love of the work. It did not come. She let the truth stand there in the middle of the floor without a stitch of ornament on it. And, because he was still looking at her and something in his face must have asked for more, she gave him more, in the same even voice. "The lady I served died in the spring and left me nothing to leave her, having little herself. I have £12, your grace, and a box, and no family able to keep me, and by the autumn I shall have neither the £12 nor a character, if I sit idle to preserve my dignity. So I need the place. But I should not have walked 11 miles and waited 4 hours in your passage for the wage alone. I am good with children, and yours, I am told, has lost her mother, as I lost mine at very near her age, and there are not so many people in the world who know from the inside of their own chest what that particular silence sounds like. That is the whole of my reason. I have flattered no one to get here, and I will not begin with you." He realized he had risen from his chair, and could not have said at what point in her speech he had done it. Across the desk, across the width of the cold, gilded room. He stood and looked at a governess in a mended gown who had just told him the one thing no one told a duke, that she wanted his money because she would starve without it, and had made of that confession something that left her not lowered but strangely lifted. Standing straighter than the feathered bonnet had stood, straighter than any of them. "You are very frank," he said. It came out roughened. "I am told it is my worst fault." She did not smile now. "I would rather you knew it at the door than found it out at the hearth, and felt deceived." The word deceived struck him somewhere old and covered over, and for an instant she must have seen the strike of it, though he had spent 3 years making his face unreadable, for her eyes changed not with triumph at having landed a blow, for she had aimed none, but with something quieter. A flicker of concern, as if she had trodden without knowing on ground that was tender and wished she had not. She looked away first, and it was a kindness, and he was not accustomed to being shown kindness by anyone who wanted something from him. He should have concluded it there. He had his answer. She was honest, honest to the point of imprudence, and honesty was not the whole of what a governess required. But he found he did not wish to conclude it, and so he sat again and drew toward him the pile of references the morning had produced, and asked her, in the cool level tone he used for business, what languages she read, what music she could teach, what accomplishments she offered a girl of 7 who would one day take her place in society. And here, he thought, watching her, here it will show. For the morning had been a pageant of accomplishments. He had heard 6 women declare themselves fluent in the French and the Italian both, and one had rattled off a speech in what she assured him was Italian and which had been very confident nonsense. A fact Esmond had kept behind his teeth, because he had married a woman who lied prettily, and had learned that the lie itself was the whole of the information he required. "I read French well," Joan said, "and write it passably. I have a little Italian, enough to read but not enough to boast of, so I will not boast of it. I play the pianoforte plainly and honestly, and no better than plainly, and I would sooner tell you so now than have you hear me through a wall and think you had been cheated. But I read Latin, your grace, which the ladies before me will not have offered you, because it is thought a strange thing in a woman and no ornament in a drawing-room. My father was a schoolmaster before he was anything else, and he taught me as he would have taught a son he did not have, and I have never had the sense to be ashamed of it, though I have often had cause. It was then that it happened, the small thing he would afterward count as the true beginning, though at the moment it passed almost without his marking why it fastened on him so. There was a letter open on his desk, turned toward him, a wretched involved communication from a creditor of the estate written in the cramped hand and worse Latin of a country attorney, over a disputed clause that had already cost Esmond an afternoon and 2 tempers. His eyes, following her voice, had dropped to it, and John Salter's eyes, following his, dropped to it also only for a heartbeat, only the flick of a glance a person gives a page turned upside down before them and something crossed her face. Comprehension. She had read it. Upside down and at 10 feet, the wretched crabbed Latin of it, and she had understood the sense of it, and he saw her understand, and he saw her, in the same instant, decide to say nothing, because it was not her place, and because she had come to be a governess and not to correct a duke's law. "You read that," he said. It was not a question. Colour came up under her skin, the first she had shown. "I beg your pardon, your grace." It was turned toward me. I did not mean to pry. You read it, and you frowned at it. Why did you frown? For the first time she seemed uncertain whether to answer, waiting something, and when she chose the truth, as he was beginning to understand she always would. Because whoever wrote it has confused 2 words that sound alike and mean opposite things, and if that clause is read as it stands you will be held to a thing I do not think you ever agreed to, but I may be wrong. I am a schoolmaster's daughter and not a lawyer, and it is a long time since my Latin was fed. Esmond looked at the letter. He looked at her. Then he turned the page fully about, pushed it the length of the desk toward her, and said, "Show me." She came forward. She had to. The desk was wide. She bent over the page, and he caught the plain, clean scent of her, of soap and cold air, and none of the hothouse flowers that had hung about the morning room all day, and she set one blunt, ink-faintly stained finger under a line and read aloud, first in the Latin and then, without pausing to arrange the words prettily, in an English that made the crabbed sentence suddenly, unarguably plain. She was right. Of course she was right. He had paid a man in the town 4 guineas to be less clearly right than this governess was for nothing, standing in a mended gown with her £12 in the world, and he sat and listened to her unmake in 90 seconds a snarl that had held him 3 days. "There," she said, and straightened, and seemed only then to remember where she was, and to whom she had been giving a lesson in Latin, and the colour came up in her face again, hotter. I have overstepped. Forgive me, your grace. You asked, or I should never." "You have not overstepped," he said, and heard how unlike his own voice it was. There came at that moment a sound from the far end of the gallery, and the doors opened without Pell's leave, and Miss Sybil Southgate came in upon a wave of scent and self-possession, having grown weary, evidently, of waiting to be summoned a second time. She was everything John Salter was not gowned to the last inch, golden, sure of her welcome as only a girl reared to expect one can be, and she had been that morning the most polished of all the 30, the one whose father's name Esmond's own advisers had murmured he would do well to please. Her glance took in the room in a single sweep, the Duke on his feet, the pushed-across letter, and the plain grey woman standing far too near the ducal desk with ink on her finger, and her lovely mouth curved. "Your Grace, I do beg your pardon, I had understood the day's business finished." A little silvered laugh, aimed like a dart. "I did not know you were still receiving, though I see the parish has sent up its assistance. How very charitable of you to hear her out. One does like to think the poor are given their moment, even when the matter is quite decided." The insult was beautifully made. There was not a syllable in it a man could take open exception to. It hung in the air, and Esmond felt the old machinery of his rank move in him, the impulse to smooth, to spare Miss Southgate's father, to let the plain woman be gently and finally dismissed as everyone in the room but one clearly expected her to be. He watched Joan Salter receive it. She did not flush this time, nor drop her eyes, nor fumble after a reply. She looked at Sybil Southgate with a great and perfect calm, and she said quietly, "You are quite right that I am the parish's madam. It is no secret, and I would not make it one. I think his grace was not deciding between our gowns." And she folded her hands again and said nothing more and let it lie. It was not a wound. It drew no blood and raised no flush on Sybil Southgate's clear cheek. It was only true, and it was so completely, so unanswerably true that Miss Southgate's smile held its shape a half-second too long and then had nowhere to go. Esmond, who had spent his whole guarded life among people whose weapon was the pleasing untruth, felt something in his chest turn over that had lain motionless a long while, and he understood, with a clarity that alarmed him, that he did not want this woman to leave his house. "Miss Southgate," he said, and his voice had the old iron in it, so that she started, "my steward will send to your father with my answer in the ordinary course. I am, as you observe, still receiving. You will forgive me if I do not keep Miss Salter standing while I bid you good day." The colour that Joan Salter had not shown at the insult now flooded Sybil Southgate's face entire. She curtsied, it was owed, and she was too well bred to fail of it even in fury, and she went, and the great doors closed behind her scent, and the long gallery was quiet again and cold. And Esmond found that he had not looked away from the plain grey governess through the whole of it, and could not, now, quite make himself begin. "That was ill done of me," Joan said into the silence low. "I should have let it pass. It costs a person like that nothing, and it may cost me the place." "No," he said, "you should not have let it pass, and has not cost you the place." He picked up her thin paper of a reference, the clergyman's widow, the single line from the parish, and he looked at it, and did not read a word of it. "You will come tomorrow at 10 and meet my daughter. If Amelia will have you, and Amelia, I warn you, has sent 4 of these women weeping to their carriages, the place is yours, and the wage is £30 and not the 20 pell will have offered." She stood very still. "Your Grace, I did not come to bargain the wage up." "I told you I would have taken the 20. "I know you would," Esmond said. "That is precisely why you shall have the 30. For a moment she seemed unable to answer at all. Then she made him her plain, unhurried curtsy, and gathered her worn shawl, and went to the door. And there she paused, one hand upon it, and looked back at him across the whole length of the gilded room, where 30 polished women had told him 30 polished lies, and she said, "Thank you for turning the letter round, Your Grace. Most people would not have let me see they were snared." And she was gone. Esmond stood alone in the long gallery a grate while after the sound of her feet had faded from the passage. On the desk lay the creditor's letter, its snare undone, and he did not look at it. He looked at the door, and at the empty place before the desk where she had stood. And he was a man of 39 years and considerable powers, who had believed himself long past the reach of surprise, and he understood, standing there, that he had asked a governess to return chiefly because he could not yet bear the room without her in it, and that this was a dangerous thing to have discovered, and that he was going to discover a great deal more of it, and could no more stop himself than stop the turning of the earth. The frost held 6 days more, and in those 6 days Esmond told himself 100 times that he had made no decision at all. He had merely permitted John Salter to remain at Westdale while the matter of the household was properly weighed. A trial, he named it, when Pell looked at him too long across the breakfast things. A fortnight's trial and no more. It was a lie the size of a man's whole life, and he knew it for one each morning when he heard, drifting down the nursery stair, a sound the house had not made in 14 months. Child's voice, low and halting, forming words to a woman who answered her without haste and without pity, as though there were nothing in the world so ordinary as Lady Amelia beginning at last to speak. He had not gone up to hear it more nearly. He had stood in the cold gallery with his hand on the newel post and listened like a thief to his own daughter, and had not trusted himself to climb the last flight, because he did not know what his face would do if he saw the two of them together. And a duke who does not know what his own face will do is a duke in some danger. So when his aunt's travelling chariot came grinding up the gravel on the 7th morning, 4 horses and a coachman and a mountain of imperial luggage strapped behind, Esmond felt something in him that was almost relief. The Dowager Lady Ferrers descended upon a household the way weather descended upon a harvest, and she would fill the rooms with noise and opinion and county gossip, and he would not, for a few days at least, have to stand alone at the foot of a stair listening to the ruin of his own defences. Esmond. His aunt presented her cheek, cold as marble, and swept past him into the great hall with her cane striking the flags like a magistrate calling order. She was 70 and upright as a grenadier, and she had buried 2 husbands and a great deal of sentiment along the way. "I have come to save you from yourself," which is a labour I had thought concluded at your christening. The whole county is speaking of nothing else. They say you have shut your door upon 30 gentlewomen and thrown it open to a pauper you found standing in the rain. I did not believe it. I have driven 40 miles in the cold to disbelieve it to your face. Then you have wasted a cold morning, Aunt, Esmond said, for it is true. Lady Ferrers stopped. Behind her, through the open doors, a second carriage was drawing up, a smart barouche, its panels newly varnished, and from it there stepped, with the practised grace of a woman who has been admired from the cradle, Miss Sybil Southgate. Esmond knew her at once. As any man in 3 counties knew her, the beauty of the season, gold-haired, cream and rose, gowned even for a journey in a blue that had cost some doting father a very great deal, and possessed of the serene certainty, worn like a second pelisse, that every room she entered had been waiting only for her arrival to be complete. She had smiled at Esmond across a dozen ballrooms these 2 years past, and her mother had smiled harder, and the whole apparatus of the Southgate ambition had been trained upon Westdale as patiently and as remorselessly as a gun laid upon a wall. He had felt the smile land on him now, and had felt, as he always felt, precisely nothing, the old cold habit 7 years deep, that told him a face that Lovely had learned very early exactly what it was worth, and would sell it dear. Your Grace, said Sybil, sinking into a curtsy of exquisite depth, how good of your aunt to bring me. I could not bear to think of you here in this great house with only ledgers and her glance moved delicately up the stair, with only servants for company. It is not natural in a man of your rank to be so much alone. I am seldom alone, Miss Southgate, Esmond said. I have never in my life been able to arrange it. It was not the gallantry she had angled for, and a flicker crossed the lovely face and was smoothed away. But Lady Ferrers laughed her dry short laugh and took the girl's arm, and the 2 of them went in together toward the warmth of the morning room, the aunt already declaiming upon the scandal of the household, and the beauty already agreeing in a voice like poured cream, and Esmond followed, and understood, with the weary clarity of a man who has spent his life being managed, exactly what the next several days were meant to accomplish. His aunt had not come about a governess at all. She had come to install a duchess, and the governess was merely the pretext under which the guns had been rolled up to the wall. They dined that evening, a party of 9, the county thickening about the table as word ran out that Lady Ferrers held Westdale, and the diamond of the season sat at the Duke's right hand. Esmond bore it as he bore all such evenings, from behind the grey unhurried gaze that let no one in, and answered when he was spoken to, and watched the candlelight lie golden along Sybil Southgate's perfect throat and felt it stir him not at all. And all the while some part of him, mutinous and unnowned, was counting the hours until the guests were gone and the house was quiet, and he might, perhaps, contrive to walk past a certain door on the nursery stair. It was after dinner, when the company had removed to the long drawing-room and the tea-things were brought, that they sent for Joan Salter. Esmond did not send for her. He learned of it only when the doors opened and she came in, still in the grey stuff gown she wore for the schoolroom, her dark hair pinned plainly, a slate and a child's copybook held against her as though she had been summoned straight from a lesson, which he saw at once from the ink on her fingers his aunt had wrung for her. Lady Ferrers sat enthroned by the fire with Sybil arranged prettily at her knee and half the county ranged about, and she had sent for the pauper her nephew had taken in, to look at her, the way one sends for a curiosity after dinner to divert the ladies. So, said Lady Ferrers, raising her glass to her eye and surveying Joan from her mended hem to her plain-pinned crown, this is the paragon. Come here, girl, into the light, where we may all have the good of you. Do not be shy. We have heard a great deal. Joan came into the light. She did not shrink, and she did not simper, and she did not sweep the glittering room with the frightened, ingratiating glance that the ladies plainly expected of a servant caught in her working gown before her betters. She curtsied to the dowager correctly and without excess, and she stood, and she waited, with the same still patience Esmond had first seen in a grey figure by a mounting block, as though a drawing-room full of silk and diamonds were merely another sort of cold to be quietly outlasted. They tell me, said Sybil Southgate sweetly, that you came to us upon a carrier's cart. From where was it? Some little place, Aldecott. She let the name fall as one lets fall a thing distasteful to the fingers, 11 miles in the open in December. How very resolute. I do so admire resolution in a person of your sort. It is quite the only thing your sort has, after all, to recommend it. A ripple of amusement moved through the seated ladies, well-bred and low. Tell me, did you walk the last of it? One hears the carriers will not turn off the low road, and Westdale lies rather above their notice. Or were you set down at the gates like the parcels? I walked from the lodge, Miss Southgate, Joan said. Her voice was even and low and carried no heat at all. It is not a long way, and the avenue is very fine. I was glad of the walking. It is easier to arrive somewhere on one's own feet than to be carried the whole distance and never learn the road. It was mildly said, and it might have meant nothing, and it landed nonetheless. Esmond saw it land. Saw the small tightening at the corner of Sybil Southgate's lovely mouth, for there was not a soul in that room who had come to Westdale on her own feet, and the beauty at the dowager's knee had been carried the whole of her distance and set down, varnished, at the gates of every advantage she owned. But Sybil was not a woman to be turned by a single thrust, and she had her ground prepared. She leaned to the lady beside her, a Mrs. Cardew, thin and sharp and eager to please where the Southgate interest pointed, and she said lightly in French, and the particular smiling malice of a person who believes the object of it cannot follow the words, regardez-la. On lui donne des leçons à faire, et elle croit être une gouvernante. Une fille de rien, en laine reprisée, qui joue à l'institutrice pour un duc. C'est presque touchant, la manière dont les pauvres s'imaginent. Look at her, they give her lessons to set, and she believe herself a governess. A girl of nothing, in mended wool, playing at schoolmistress for a duke. It is almost touching the way the poor imagined themselves. Mrs. Cardew tittered. Several of the ladies who had the French smiled behind their fans. And Esmond, who had the French as well as any man Oxford bred, felt the old cold anger begin to rise in him and had half risen with it to put an end to the evening, when Joan Salter turned her head and looked full at Sybil Southgate and answered her. She answered in French. Not the schoolroom French of accomplishment, the laboured dative and the memorized complement, but French quick and pure and easy, the French of a person who has read in it and thought in it and perhaps dreamed in it, falling from her lips as naturally as her own tongue. Vous avez raison, mademoiselle, que la laine est reprisée. Je l'ai reprisée moi-même, et proprement ce qui est plus que bien des dames sauraient faire de leur propre fortune. Mais vous vous trompez sur un point. Une gouvernante n'est pas celle qui porte la belle robe. C'est celle qui sait la chose qu'elle enseigne. Le reste n'est que le tissu. You are right, mademoiselle, that the wool is mended. I mended it myself, and neatly, which is more than many ladies could do with their own fortunes. But you mistake one thing. A governess is not she who wears the fine gown. She is she who knows the thing she teaches. The rest is only cloth. The drawing-room went very still. It is a particular silence, that which falls when a company has arranged itself to watch a humbling and finds the ground shifted beneath its own feet. Mrs. Cardew's fan hung motionless. Two of the county ladies exchanged a glance in which the smiling had entirely stopped, and Sybil Southgate sat with the colour mounting slow and ugly beneath the cream and rose, staring at the girl in mended wool who had answered her insult in a French finer than her own, before half the neighbourhood, in a voice without a single tremor of triumph, which was the worst of it, that there had been no triumph in it, only the quiet correction of a fact. Where, said Lady Ferrers, and her glass had come down from her eye, and there was something in the old woman's voice that had not been there before. Not warmth, the dowager did not deal in warmth, but attention. The sudden sharp attention of a duellist who discovers the ragged stranger opposite has a blade after all. Where, girl, did you learn to speak so? In a house that valued it, my lady, Joan said, and I was turned out of that house for the valuing. It is not a thing that recommends a governess to know more than she is thought to have any business knowing. I have found it costs a great deal more than it earns. And there it was, the whole poison page of Lady Wexcombe's character. The presumed above her station in the matter of the young lady's education, spoken plainly at last and turned, in the speaking, from a stain into an accusation that fell not upon the girl, but upon every soul in that gilded room who had ever punished a servant for knowing too much. Esmond looked at her standing there in the candlelight with her ink-stained fingers and her mended hem and her chin level, and he felt something come loose in his chest that he had spent 7 winters riveting down, and he found that he was on his feet. "That will do," he said. The whole room turned. He had spoken quietly, but a duke's quiet in his own drawing-room falls like a gate. "Miss Salter sets lessons for my daughter until a late hour and is wanted upstairs, not paraded for the tea-table like a spaniel new bought." His gaze moved across the seated ladies, unhurried and grey, and came to rest a moment upon his aunt and a moment upon Sybil Southgate, and did not spare them. "She has answered every discourtesy shown her this evening with more grace than the discourtesy deserved, and in better French, and I find I've no further appetite for the entertainment. Miss Salter, I am sorry you were disturbed. Good night." He had surprised himself. He heard it in the silence that followed, felt it in the frank astonishment on Pell's face where the steward stood by the door, for the Duke of Westdale did not defend servants, did not reprove his guests, did not spend the coin of his own displeasure upon so slight a thing as a governess's dignity. He had spent it now, before the whole county, and he could not for the life of him have said he regretted it. John Salter looked at him. It was only a moment, across the width of the bright room, but in it there was no gratitude of the fawning kind, no melting, no seizing of the advantage he had handed her. There was something graver and far more disarming, a swift, clear, measuring look, as though she were revising some private estimate of him, and was not yet certain in which direction. Then she curtsied to him and to the dowager both, and she gathered her slate and her copybook and she went, and the doors closed behind her with that soft final click that Esmond had come to know as the punctuation of his own life, and that sounded tonight not like weariness at all. Lady Ferrers found him an hour later in the library, when the guests had been seen to their carriages and Sybil Southgate had gone up to bed with a headache and a grievance, and the great cold room was his own again. "You made a spectacle of yourself, Esmond," his aunt said, "over a girl in a darned gown." "I made an end of a spectacle you began, aunt. There is a difference, though I grant it is a fine one at this hour." She studied him a long moment from the doorway, the shrewd old eyes that had married off half the county missing nothing. "She is clever," Lady Ferrers said at last, and it was not a compliment. "Cleverer than is safe in her station." Cleverness in a poor woman is a knife that cuts the hand that keeps it, Esmond, and cuts sharper the hand of any fool who takes it up. Send her away and marry the Southgate girl and be done. It is what your father would have counselled, and your father was seldom wrong in the management of this house. "My father," Esmond said, "married for the management of this house, and was miserable in it every day of his life, and taught me by his example to do the same, and I have obeyed him faithfully these 7 years. He looked into the cold and empty grate. "Good night, aunt." When she had gone he did not go up to bed. He took a candle and went instead by the back stair toward the nursery wing, telling himself it was to look in upon Amelia, as a father might, and on the schoolroom landing, where a lamp still burned late, he found Joan Salter alone at the long table, the copybooks stacked before her, her head bent over a slate on which she was working sums by the failing light, not a child's sums he saw as he drew near, but columns of true figures, long and dense and rapidly reckoned, the estate's own hand upon the page. She rose when she saw him, but she did not hide the slate, and she did not fill the silence with thanks for the drawing-room, which was the thing he had half dreaded and half expected. "You need not have done it," she said instead, "what you did tonight. It was kindly meant, and I am not ungrateful. But you have made an enemy of that beautiful girl on my account, and she will not forgive it. And it is I who will pay the reckoning and not you. A duke may rescue a governess before the whole county, and go up to his bed the better for it. The governess must still be here in the morning, in the same darned gown, with one powerful lady the more who wishes her gone." She said it without bitterness, plainly as one lays out an account for a man who ought to see it whole. "So I would ask you, your grace, do not rescue me again, unless you have counted what it costs the one you rescue. I have been rescued before. It is how I came to be turned out of doors. No one had spoken to him so in 7 years. No one had dared. And Esmond, Duke of Westdale, feared the length of 3 counties, stood in the low lamplight of a schoolroom with his candle guttering in his hand, and felt the whole cold architecture of his reserve stand suddenly open to the draught, and knew, with a plain dismay that was very near to fear, that he did not want to leave. That he would have stood there in the failing light and argued the point with her, and lost, and stood longer, and heard her tell him more truths he did not want and could not do without, and that the wanting of it, the sheer unfamiliar hunger of it, frightened him more than any enemy his aunt could name. A month to the day after Joan Salter had walked 11 miles to stand in his passage, the Duke of Westdale caught himself timing his return from the home farm so that he should come up the avenue at the hour the schoolroom candles were lit. And catching himself at it, was disgusted, and did the same thing the following evening notwithstanding. He told himself it was the ordinary care of a father who had been a poor one. He had believed that for perhaps 3 days. He no longer troubled to believe it now, riding in under the wet October elms with the light already yellow in the west wing, but he had not yet found a name he was willing to give the thing instead, and a man of his habits does not like to walk about with a nameless matter loose in his chest. Amelia had done for him what argument could not. He had left his door a month before, a small, stiff creature who flinched at a raised voice and answered questions of any weight with a curtsy and a silence, as though silence were a wall she might get behind and pull down after her. He had grieved over her and not known in the least what to do for her, for grief was a country in which he was fluent, and yet could not seem to teach her a word of the language. And then this plain woman in a mended gown had gone up to the schoolroom, and had not petted the child, nor pitied her, nor called her a poor motherless lamb, all of which 4 previous governesses had done and been hated for. She had, by every account Mrs. Dunn brought down to him, simply set the girl to work, and treated the work as a matter of consequence, and treated Amelia as a person capable of it, and somewhere in the doing of Latin nouns and the naming of the hedgerow birds, and the mending of a doll's torn frock with those same fine invisible stitches. The wall had come down of itself, quietly, without anyone being asked to grieve. He had heard his daughter laugh 3 days since. He had been passing the schoolroom on his way to nowhere in particular. He had a good deal of business of late, on his way to nowhere in particular, and through the door, ajar, had come Amelia's laugh, a real one, high and helpless and entirely unguarded, the laugh of a child who has for the moment forgotten to be afraid. And he had stopped in the passage with his hand flat against the panelling and stood a long moment not trusting himself to go in, because the sound had gone through him like a blade turned the merciful way. He had not heard it since before the Duchess died. He had begun to think he never should again. So it was that on the evening after Michaelmas, coming up wet and cold from the farm, he did not go to his own rooms to be changed, as a man of his station ought, but went up the west stair to the schoolroom, telling himself he would look in on the child's progress and be gone in 5 minutes, and he found the door open and Amelia already gone to her bed, and Joan Salter alone at the long deal table in her plain grey with a single branch of candles, a book open before her and her lips moving over it, not aloud, in the private way of a person reading something she loves in a language she must reach for. She did not hear him at first. It gave him a moment he had not meant to steal, watching her without her knowing she was watched, the fall of the candlelight along her cheek, the small frown of pure concentration, the blunt ink-stained finger keeping her place on the page, and he understood, standing in the dark of the doorway, that he had come up 3 flights of stairs in wet boots to see precisely this, and that no business of Amelia's had brought him. "You will strain your eyes by 1 candle, Miss Salter," he said, to end it, and had the doubtful satisfaction of seeing her start half out of her chair. "Your Grace." She was up and had made her curtsy before the book was fairly closed. "I did not hear Lady Amelia's long aid, Your Grace, I assure you. She was asleep before 8. I only stayed 2. She stopped, and he watched her decline, as he had known she would, the easy lie that would have covered her. "I stayed because the room is warm and my own is not, and because the book is a good one and there is no one to want it of me. That is the whole of it. I ought to have taken it below. What is the book?" He came in. The schoolroom was low and shabby and smelled of chalk and tallow and the drying woolens on the fireguard, and it was, he was obliged to admit, warmer and more like a place a living person might sit than any of the great cold rooms below where his own evenings were spent. He put out his hand for the volume and she gave it to him, and their fingers did not touch quite, and he was aware to the last degree of the not touching. It was a small worn orris, the boards rubbed pale at the corners, the margins close written in a fading brown ink in a firm masculine hand not her own. He turned the leaves. Half the odes were annotated, a word construed here, a scansion marked there, and here and there something else, not scholarship at all but a private word, a mark of love against a line. This is true, and once in the same brown ink, my Joan will understand this when she is older than she thinks. My father's, she said, watching his face find the words. She did not say it to be pitied. She said it the way she said everything, to save him the trouble of wondering. He wrote in his books as other men talk. It was the only fortune he had to leave, and he left the whole of it in the margins. When the sale came, after a small pause, quickly mended, the man who bought his library let me keep the 3 that were written in, for he said they'd fetch less spoiled with a woman's scribble, not knowing whose the scribble was, and I did not tell him. So I have 3 books my father talked to me in, your grace, and £12, and I count myself, on the whole, a very rich woman on the strength of the 3. Esmond stood turning the pages of a dead schoolmaster's Horace in a shabby schoolroom, and felt the careful architecture of 30 years shift another quarter-inch beneath him. He had known with 10,000 a year, who owned nothing they could have said that of. He set the book down on the deal table between them very gently as a thing of value. He taught you, he said. You told me. As he would have taught a son. He had meant to have a school of his own, a proper school, with boys who would go up to the university, and he made a beginning of it once. In a good town, and it prospered a little. She sat, because he had drawn out the chair opposite and set himself in it, which no duke had any business doing in a governess's schoolroom at 9 o'clock at night. And both of them knew it, and neither of them named it. And then he stood Shorty for a friend, a schoolfellow of his own, a man he had loved 30 years and would not doubt, and the man went to the continent and did not come back, and my father paid what he had promised to pay, to the last shilling. Because he had put his name to it, and his name was the whole of him, it ruined us. We went from the good town to a worse, and from the school to a single pupil got by charity, and my mother took a chill in the worse house that she would not have taken in the good one, and did not rise from it. She said it levelly, her hands folded on the edge of the table. I do not tell you this for your sorrow, your grace. You have your own and do not need the loan of mine. I tell you so that you will understand I know the price of a man's word, having watched my father pay it and never once, to the end of his life, wish it unpaid. He said a name that would not answer for itself was not worth the breath to speak it. I have found no reason yet to think him wrong. The fire settled. Somewhere below a door was shut, and the great clock on the half landing told the quarter in its deep, slow voice, and Esmond did not speak. Because there was a thing rising in him that wanted saying, and that he had not said to any living soul, and the wanting of it frightened him more than any creditor's snare. I was married 4 years, he heard himself begin and stopped, astonished at his own voice going on without his leave. You will have heard the half of it from the servants. You may as well have the rest from me and not from them. She was the most admired woman of her season, and I was a young man who believed, God help me, that to be so admired she must be admirable. She said yes to everything I was and everything I owned. I took the yes for love. It was 3 months married before I understood that she had never in her life told me a single thing that was not calculated to move me the way she wished me moved, and that I had married a very fine instrument played by a cold and clever hand, and that I should spend the rest of my days as the audience of a performance got up entirely for my money. She did not even trouble to hate me. Hatred would have been a kind of attention. She was merely bored and rich, and I was the price of the second, and the cause of the first. He looked at his own hands on the deal table. When she died, I found that what I mourned was not her. It was the boy who had believed her. I have not since been able to hear a person agree with me without hunting behind their eyes for the hand upon the strings. It has made me, I am told, a hard man to serve and a harder to like. I have not troubled to correct the report. He had never said it. Not to Pell, who had watched it all, and was too loyal to have spoken of it. Not to his own mother, who had warned him of the woman and been proved right and had the grace never to say so. He had said it now to a governess with £12 in the world across a schoolroom table, and he did not know why, except that she had given him her father's ruin without one bid for his pity. and it had seemed a poor sort of cowardice to take the gift and offer nothing of his own in the dark. Joan Salter did not do any of the things he had braced himself against her doing. She did not exclaim nor lay her hand upon her heart, nor tell him that surely he was too severe upon himself, that surely somewhere the poor lady had loved him. She sat very still in the candlelight and looked at him with those direct grey eyes gone soft at the edges, and when she spoke it was low. "Then I am sorry for you, your grace," she said, "and I will tell you a thing you will not like, because you have paid me in truth tonight, and I will not give you false coin back. You have taught yourself that the whole world is playing you a tune, and a man who believes that can never again be told he is loved, because the moment the words come he must go looking for the hand on the strings, as you say, and he will always find it, for a man who looks for a thing hard enough will find it whether it is there or no. It is a very safe way to live. Nothing can ever get in to hurt you." She paused. "But nothing can ever get in at all. And your Amelia, your grace, is up those stairs learning it from you by heart, one silent supper at a time, and she will keep it all her life, unless someone teaches her otherwise, and I do not think you wish that for her, whatever you may wish for yourself." It should have angered him. A month before, from any other mouth, it would have brought down the old iron and ended a career. Instead, he found he had put out his hand across the width of the table and laid it, not upon hers, but on the closed cover of her father's book that lay between them, the nearest to her that a man might come and still call it decent, and she looked down at his hand, and did not draw the book away, and for the space of several heartbeats neither of them moved at all, and the small distance between his fingers hers was the loudest thing in the room. "Then teach her otherwise," he said, and his voice was not the Duke's voice at all. "You have already begun. I have heard her laugh. I had thought that was gone out of my house for good." "That was not my doing," Joan said, but she said it unsteadily now, and she had not moved her hand, and the candle flame stood straight and undisturbed between them, because neither of them was breathing quite as they should. That was in her the whole time. It only wanted someone to think her worth the trouble of it, he said, "as do a great many things in this house that have gone quiet these 3 years. He was aware that he had leaned across the table, that the sensible width of it had somehow narrowed, that if he moved his hand the breadth of 2 inches he would be touching hers, and that once he had done it there would be no undoing it, and no pretending it a governess's interview. He was a man who had spent 3 years making certain that nothing could get in. He understood, in that suspended moment over a dead schoolmaster's Horace, that this small brave woman had gotten past every gate without once seeming to try the lock, and that he no longer had the smallest wish to put her out. It was the clock that saved them, or ruined them, he was long uncertain which. It struck the 3/4, and the great sound broke the spell as a stone breaks a still pond, and Joan Salter drew back a hand at last and stood, quickly, the colour high in her face, and the whole hard-won propriety of her station came down over her like a dropped veil. "It is very late, your grace, and it is not fitting," she said low and fast, "and you know it is not better than I, for you have the more to lose by it. If it were known you sat here," she gathered the book to her breast with both arms, as though she needed something to hold. "I am your daughter's governess, and I mean to remain so, and be worth the £30, and I cannot do that, and also," she stopped. She would not lie, even now, even to make the retreat easier. He saw her refuse it. "Good night, your grace," she said instead, which was true, and left the rent said, which was truer. He rose, because a gentleman rises, and because if he had stayed seated he might have said the thing that must not yet be said. "Good night, Miss Salter," he answered, and went to the door, and there, with his hand upon it as hers had been upon the great door a month before, he found he could not quite make himself go through it. "You are right in every particular," he said, without turning. "It is not fitting, and I have the more to lose, and I shall not come up again at this hour. I give you my word, which you have taught me tonight to think is worth something, a breath. I find that I am sorry to give it." And he went down the west stair in his wet boots in the dark past the sleeping child, and did not trust himself to look back. It was 3 days after that the letter came, cream-laid, crested, and heavy in the hand, and Pell brought it to him at breakfast with a face carefully wiped of expression, which was how Esmond knew before he broke the seal that he would not like it. It was from Lady Markholt, his late wife's aunt and the county's most tireless manager of other people's affairs, to say that she proposed to bring a small party to Westdale for the shooting before the weather closed in, some 8 or 10 of the neighbourhood's best, that she had taken the liberty of including the Southgates. Dear Sybil being such a favourite and her father so very much a man his Grace would wish to oblige in the matter of the turnpike bill, and that she flattered herself the visit should do something at last to draw the poor dear Duke out of the melancholy seclusion in which he had buried himself far too long, and to remind him, she added, that a great house wants a mistress and a motherless girl a mother, and that these things did not arrange themselves. They arrived, she wrote, on Thursday se'nnight. Esmond set the letter beside his cold coffee and looked out through the long windows at the wet park, where somewhere above him, 3 floors up, a governess in a mended grey gown was teaching his daughter to decline a Latin noun and to laugh, and he understood, with the cold, clean certainty of a man who has heard a distant gun and knows the ball is already in the air, that the world he had spent a month failing to keep out was about to come up his own avenue in a train of carriages, and that it would look at Joan Salter exactly once, and know at a glance everything he had not yet dared to know himself. The blow came on a hard, bright morning at the tail of January, and Esmond would remember, long afterward, and with a shame that never wholly healed, that he had been happy when it came, or as near to happy as a guarded man permits himself to walk, which is to say unarmed. He had breakfasted with the winter sun laying long gold bars across the cloth, and Amelia had been brought down to sit with him, as she now was most mornings, and she had looked at the honey and said, in a small clear voice that still had the newness on it, "May I have the comb of it, Papa?" And not the poured. A whole sentence, a want plainly asked, the second such in a week. He had answered her gravely, as one answers an ambassador, and had passed the honeycomb down the length of the table himself rather than let a footman do it, and had sat afterward with his coffee cooling, listening to his daughter hum tunelessly over her plate, and had thought, without letting the thought fully form lest it break in the forming, that the woman upstairs had given him back not 1 life but 2. It was into that unguarded ease that Pell came, and Esmond knew from the steward's face, before a word was spoken, that some ordinary and terrible thing had happened, for Pell had not worn such a face since the winter of the letters. "Your Grace." Pell's voice was very low, and his eyes went once to the child and away. "I must beg you to come. There is a matter has arisen this morning that I would not lay before your table, but it will not keep, and it must not be spoken of before Lady Amelia." Esmond rose. He had the nurse sent for, and kissed his daughter's crown, and went out into the cold gallery with the ease already draining from him, and the old iron settling back into its accustomed place, and there Pell told him. The Duchess's jewels, his mother's that had been Cecilia's after her, that lay in the strong-box in the muniment room against the day Amelia should be grown to wear them, had been found that morning to be short of their tail. The great collar of diamonds was in its case. The pearls were in theirs. But the drop, the single pier-cut diamond his grandfather had brought from The Hague, the stone that alone among all that cold treasure was worth a farmer's whole freehold, was gone from its velvet. And the velvet smoothed after it as though a careful hand had wished the theft to lie quiet a while yet. When was it last seen? Michaelmas Quarter, your Grace, when I checked the plate and the stones against the inventory in the ordinary way. It has been sound since my father's time. Pell hesitated, and there was misery in the hesitation. It was Miss Southgate who found the lack. She had asked her ladyship your aunt might she see the famous Westdale stones, ladies being ladies, and her ladyship indulged her, and had me open the box before them not an hour since. And it was Miss Southgate whose eye went first to the empty setting, and Miss Southgate who said, before I could speak, before I had rightly seen it myself, that a house must know its own servants, and that a stone does not walk. Something cold and very old turned over in Esmond's chest. He said nothing. He went down the gallery and into the small drawing-room where his aunt held her mornings, and found it already arranged against him, arranged, he saw, with the swift instinct of a man who has spent his life among people who arrange rooms, the way a general reads a field before he is well upon it. The dowager sat enthroned by the fire, upright and grim. Mrs. Cardew hovered at her shoulder, thin and bright-eyed with the pleasure of a calamity that is not one's own, and Sybil Southgate stood a little apart at the window in a gown the pale blue of a winter sky, her hands folded, her lovely face composed into exactly the degree of sorrow that becomes a young woman obliged to witness the exposure of another's crime, grieved, but not triumphant, concerned, but very sure. "Esmond," said Lady Ferrers, "I warned you. I sat in this house not 3 weeks past, and I warned you, and you gave me your father's memory for an answer. A stone is gone from your own strong box. There is one soul beneath this roof who came to it a stranger out of the parish, with a thin character and a thinner box, and there is not a servant here of 29 years standing who has ever given cause. I do not say it to wound you. I say it because someone in this room must say the plain thing, and it appears it must be an old woman. You say a great deal, Aunt," Esmond said, "for a theft an hour discovered. Then let us discover it further." She struck her cane once upon the floor. "Have her boxes searched. If I am wrong, I will beg the girl's pardon on my knees, and you may all laugh at me over dinner, if I am right." She did not finish. She did not need to. He should have refused it. He knew, even in the moment, standing cold and correct before the fire, that a just master refuses to search a servant on the word of a guest who has hated her since November, that the search itself was the trap, whatever it turned up, for a woman searched is a woman already half condemned in the mouths of those who watched it. But Sybil Southgate turned her clear grey eyes upon him then and said, softly, "Your Grace, I should think Miss Salter would herself desire it. An honest person longs to be searched. It is only the guilty who plead the insult." And there was no answer to that which did not sound, in that arranged room, like the special pleading of a man who could not govern his own household because he had lost his heart in it. So he sent for Mrs. Dunn, and he had Joan's room gone through, and he stood in the gallery outside its door while it was done and did not go in, because he did not trust his face, and a duke who does not trust his face is a duke already in retreat. They found it wrapped in the toe of a darned grey stocking at the bottom of the box that held her whole estate in the world, £12 now grown to 15 by her wage, a testament, a schoolmaster's Latin grammar much thumbed, a lock of hair he did not let himself wonder over, and the peer-cut diamond of the Dukes of Westdale, throwing its cold fire against the winter light in Mrs. Dunn's shaking hand. Joan Salter was brought down. She came as she had first come to that house, without any rustle, in the grey stuff gown, her ink-stained fingers quiet at her sides. And she looked at the stone in the housekeeper's palm, and then she looked at the ring of faces assembled to watch her fall, and last of all she looked at Esmond, and he saw her understand the whole shape of it in a single indrawn breath, the box, the guest, the arranged room. The thing that had been done to her while she taught a child her letters 2 floors above. "That is not mine," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I did not take it. I have never seen it before this moment, nor been in the room it was kept in, nor known that it existed. I say so once plainly, 'cause I will not say it 100 times to be believed, and 100 sayings would move you no further than the one." She turned her head to Lady Ferrers. "It was found in my box, my lady, which is true, and which is not the same thing as my having put it there. A box in a servant's room has no lock. Any hand in this house might reach it, and one has." "She accuses the household," breathed Mrs. Cardew, delighted. "I accuse no one I cannot name," John said. "I only say that a thing found is not a thing done, and that whoever wishes me gone has spent a costly stone to buy it, which is more than my dignity was ever worth to me, and a great deal more than it can be worth to them, unless the stone is to be quietly restored when I am well away and disgraced past any speaking. I should look, my lady, to who is likely to know within the fortnight exactly where that diamond has gone." It was well said. It was clear and cold, and it landed. Esmond saw it land, saw the flicker cross his aunt's shrewd face, and it might yet have turned the morning, for the dowager did not love Sybil Southgate, but only her uses. And it was then, seeing perhaps that the plain honesty of the girl was a blade she had underestimated once already and would not underestimate twice, that Sybil Southgate played the card she had kept. "There is this also," she said, and drew from her reticule a folded paper. "I did not wish to bring it. I found it. Forgive me, your Grace. It is a dreadful thing to have to say. I found it 4 days since, dropped upon the schoolroom stair, and I could not read it and be silent, though I have prayed to be spared the telling. It is in her hand. Compare it, if you doubt me. against her copybooks. I think you will not doubt me long. She held it out, and it was not to his aunt she held it, but to him. Esmond took the paper. He did not want to. His fingers knew before his mind did that he did not want to, and he unfolded it standing before the fire with the whole room breathing quiet about him, and he read. It was addressed to a sister, to a Nan in Aldecott, and it was written in a fair sloping hand not unlike the hand that set Amelia's sums, and it laughed at him. Dear Nan, it began, the campaign goes better than I dared write you last. The great man is duller than his portraits and lonelier than his acres, and I have only to school the mute brat and look grave over his Latin, and he softens like tallow near a flame. He fancies himself deep and is the shallowest vessel in 3 counties, wanting only to be told he is not managed while he is managed to the hilt. I catalogue it for you as I go, the plate, the Dutch stones, the rents that come in at Lady Day. For it will all be mine to reckon when I am Duchess and he is safely in his vault, and I mean to reckon it to the last farthing, having earned it in mended wool and cold civility as no lady born ever earned a shilling. Be patient. The thing is nearly done. The gallery went away from him. The fire, the folded fans, the pale blue gown at the window, all of it drew off to a great cold distance, and Esmond stood alone in the winter of 7 years gone with another paper in his hand, another fair hand, Cecilia's hand, and the same laughter running off the page like water off a slate. He had knelt in the cold on the floor of her dressing-room after they carried her out, and read her cataloguing him to her sister, the great dull duke she had landed, the estates counted like a shopkeeper's stock, the days told over until she should be a widow rich and free. And he had risen from that floor a different man, a man who never after believed a smile, who kept his rooms cold that liars might not linger in them, who had built about the ruined place a wall 7 winters thick, and it had held. It had held against 30 flattering women, and against the whole managing apparatus of the Southgate ambition. It had held against everything but one grey figure by a mounting block, who had asked him nothing and undone him wholly, and here, in his own hand, on his own hearth, was the proof at last that the wall had been right, that the one heart he had let past it had been counting his rents in mended wool all the while. He looked up from the paper, and he looked at Joan Salter, and for one terrible moment, he would spend the rest of his life unmaking that moment, and never wholly succeed. He could not tell the 2 women apart. The cold came down over his face like a visor. She saw it come. He watched her see it. Watched the thing pass across her that no accusation had wrung from her. Not the diamond, not his aunt, not the arranged and gloating room, a flinch, quickly stilled, as though something had struck her not on the pride, but somewhere beneath it, in the undefended place. And he understood with a wrench that it was his face that had struck her there, his doubt and not their malice, and that of all the blows dealt her that morning it was the only one that had gone home. Read it aloud. Your Grace, said Sybil Southgate, gently into his silence, or let me. Let the room hear what she is. You need not. Joan's voice was steady, but had gone quiet, the quiet of a person spending the last of a thing. I can see by his face what it says, or near enough. It says I am what you have all wanted me to be since the first evening, and it says it in a hand got up to look like mine, and it has been dropped where you might helpfully find it, and it has done its work. I see that it has done its work. She did not look at Sybil, she looked only at him. I will not argue it. A person cannot argue a room out of a thing it came in wanting to believe. I learned that in another house, and paid for the learning, and I'm not fool enough to pay twice for one lesson. But I will say one thing to you, Your Grace, and then I will go and pack my box, and you may send it after me by the carrier as is you sent for me. That letter was never dropped upon any stair. Look at the fold of it. It has been folded once and sharp, and carried flat in a lady's reticule. A paper walked on and picked up off a stair is creased a dozen ways and dirtied at the edge, and this is clean as the day it was penned 4 days ago, or 4 hours. She drew her breath. But you will not look at the fold. You are looking at the hand, because the hand is the wound, and someone in this room has been at pains to learn where your wound lies. I am sorry for it. I am sorrier than I am for the diamond. A man ought not to have the map of his old grief laid open on his own hearth by strangers for the pleasure of the county. No one spoke. She had said it low and even, without a tremor of appeal in it, and it hung in the cold room. And Esmond stood with the paper in his hand and the visor on his face, and could not, for the drumming of the old blood in his ears, make himself take up the fold and look. Because she was right, that was the horror of it. She was right that he had not looked. That he was staring at the loops of a forged owl and hearing a dead woman laugh, and the knowing of it and the powerlessness against it were one and the same paralysis. It was Amelia who broke it. She had come down unbidden, small and quick on the schoolroom stair, escaped from the nurse in the way of children who feel a storm in a house before they are told of it, and she stood now in the doorway in her white morning frock, with her face gone white above it. And she looked at the stone in Mrs. Dunn's hand and at Miss Salter standing alone in the middle of the great cruel circle, and she cried out, clean-whole, and louder than any word she had spoken in 14 silent months. She did not, she would not. She stays with me, Papa, she stays, and ran across the room and seized 2 fistfuls of the mended grey skirt and buried her face in it, sobbing and would not be moved. Esmond took a step toward his daughter. He got no further. For over the child's dark bent head John Salter looked at him at last, with the thing she had held back all the morning showing plain in her face, not anger, which he could have borne, but grief, the grave, clear grief of a woman who had let herself be known and now understood the cost of it. And she gathered the weeping child gently against her and said, over that small head, in a voice pitched for him alone, and yet heard by every soul in the frozen room, "You see what you must weigh, your grace, not whether I am a thief. You will settle that as you like, and the county will help you. But this child has found her voice again on a false accusation, crying it into a servant's apron, and if you send that servant away in the carrier's cart at dawn on the word of a folded letter you would not unfold, she will lose it a second time, and there will be no 31st woman to come knocking in the rain for a place that is filled." She loosened the little fists from her skirt, one and then the other, with a tenderness that undid him worse than any reproach, and set the child back and knelt to her level and said, low, "Hush now. Hush. Your papa is a just man, and justice takes a night to find its coat. Go up to nurse, my brave one. I shall be here in the morning or I shall not, and either way you have spoken, and no one living can unspeak it." And she rose and made the dowager her correct and unhurried curtsy, and made him none at all, the first discourtesy he had ever had of her, and the most just, and went out through the gathered silks to pack her box, leaving the diamond glittering in the housekeeper's hand, the forged letter unopened at its treacherous fold in the Duke's. The child's cry still ringing off the cold gilt, and Sybil Southgate at the window with her sorrowing face, beneath it, small and satisfied and swiftly hidden, the smile of a woman who at last, after long patience, seen the wall she besieged come down. The diamonds lay upon the green baize of the library table where Lady Markholt had let them fall, cold and bright, and altogether damning, and around them the shooting party had arranged itself into a court, without ever meaning to. And the Duke of Westdale stood at the head of his own room and could not, for the length of a dozen heartbeats, make himself speak. He had faced levelled pistols in his youth with a steadier pulse than this. It was not the jewels that had stopped his tongue he had ceased, somewhere in the last 3 years, to care greatly for the Duchess's diamonds, but the thing that had risen up behind them the instant Sybil Southgate said, in her soft carrying voice, that she had only wondered, only that. Why a governess with £12 in the world should keep her own coffer locked when the house was so very honest. For the words had gone straight past his reason and struck the old wound square, and the old wound had answered as old wounds do, with the cold, clean certainty that he had been made a fool of once by a woman who told him only what moved him, and that he was being made a fool of again, and that every gentle candlelit hour in the schoolroom had been the patient laying of exactly this snare. For that dozen heartbeats he had believed it. That was the thing he would not forgive himself after however long he lived, that he had looked at John Salter standing straight-backed and grey-clad against the tall shelves with the whole polished company turned upon her like dogs, and that some craven, ruined part of him had said, "You see, it was too good, they are all of them playing you a tune," and had almost been glad of the proof, and Joan had watched him believe it. That was the worst. She had not pleaded nor wept, nor cried out that it was false. She had only looked at him once, with those direct grey eyes, and he had seen in them not fear of the magistrate nor grief for her ruin, but a kind of quiet, final disappointment, as at a sum she had hoped would come right, and had, after all, come out wrong, and then she had looked away from him. And he understood that she had let him go. She had asked nothing of him, and now she expected nothing, and the withdrawing of that expectation was colder than any accusation in the room. "I have kept my coffer locked," Joan said into the silence, and her voice did not shake, "because it holds 3 books and a lock of my mother's hair, and I have learned that a poor woman who leaves her few things open finds them fewer. That is the whole of my secret, Lady Markholt, and you are welcome to the shame of having guessed at a worse." "The necklace was found within it," said Lady Markholt comfortably, folding her plump beringed hands. "Mrs. Dunn will attest she took it out with her own fingers. I am sure we are all very sorry. These things so common in a household where a person is raised above her proper sphere, it turns the head. One has seen it 100 times, and I need hardly say, Esmond, that it is precisely what I feared when I heard you put a nobody over dear Amelia. Southgate, you will support me. A great house must have order in it, and order begins with knowing what people are." "It does," said Lord Southgate, who had been enjoying his brandy and now set it down with the air of a man lending his weight to a settled thing. He was a large, florid person with a great deal of watch-chain and a habit of nodding as though the world agreed with him in advance. "It does indeed, ma'am. Send for the constable, Westdale, and have done. A day's unpleasantness is cheaper than a bad servant kept." The word constable moved in the room like a draught. Esmond saw Mrs. Dunn by the door go white and twist her apron, and he saw Pell, at his shoulder, go very still in the particular way Pell had when he disapproved and would not say so. And he saw Sybil Southgate lower her fair lashes to hide whatever was in her eyes, and he opened his mouth at last to say the thing he had wavered from saying, though he scarcely yet knew what it would be, and John Salter spoke first, and did not defend herself at all. "Before you send your grace," she swiped steadily, "you had better not sign Lord Southgate's turnpike papers. Whatever else is done with me today, do not put your name to those, for they will cost you more than a necklace, and I find I cannot go out of your house and leave that unsaid, whatever it makes me." There was a small startled laugh from somewhere among the ladies. Lord Southgate's florid face went a shade deeper. "The impertinence," he began. "They are on the table beneath the map, sir, where they were left this morning." Joan went on over him, not raising her voice but declining absolutely to stop. "And I know what is in them, because Mr. Pell, being short-handed with the house so full, gave me the fair copying of the trust accounts a se'night since. My hand being plain and my discretion, he was good enough to think, to be relied on. I copied them twice. A thing copied twice will show you its bones. And the bones of these, your grace, are rotten." Esmond did not move. Something in the level certainty of her had gone through the room like a change of pressure before a storm, and even Lady Markholt had not found her tongue. "Fetch them," said the Duke. Pell had them under the map before the sentence was well out, a fat packet of subscription lists and toll tables and a deed of trust engrossed on parchment, and he laid them on the green baize beside the diamonds, and Joan did not so much as glance at the jewels that were to hang her. She turned the deed to the third skin, and set her blunt ink-stained finger, the same finger he had watched keep her place in a schoolmaster's Horace, upon a dense thicket of the lawyer's Latin, and she read it out, not haltingly, as a person spelling through a hard tongue, but smoothly, construing as she went, the way her father had taught her across a deal table in a ruined town. "Here it stands, that the subscribers are held liable, each severally and the whole jointly, not to the amount of his subscription, which is what a gentleman signing supposes he risks, but ultra vires subscriptionis, beyond the subscription, to the full extent of the debts of the trust whatsoever, and, your grace," her finger moved, "and here, the first charge upon the whole undertaking, ranking before every honest subscriber, is a mortgage of £11,000 already granted to a private creditor named in the schedule. Turn to the schedule, and you will find the private creditor is Lord Southgate himself. You are asked to lend your name and your money to a road, and the road is pledged to his pocket before ever a stone is laid, and if it fails, and it will fail, sir, for by your own toll tables it cannot pay, the ruin falls whole upon the other subscribers, of whom the greatest and the fattest to be plucked would be the Duke of Westdale. This is the woman is a thief, and now she reads Latin at us to save her neck, said Southgate, but he had come up out of his chair, and his voice had gone loud in the way of a man who feels the floor. I read what is written, said Joan. Any scholar in England will construe it the same. But you need not take the Latin from me, sir. Take the figures, for figures do not lie even in English. She drew the toll table to her and the subscription list, and she laid them side by side. And now she did not read, she reckoned aloud, her eyes going down the columns quicker than a man could have followed with a pen. You have set your expected traffic at 1,100 vehicles the week. The parish it serves has 4,000 souls and no market of its own. The next Trust's Road, the older one, carries 800 through a richer country. You will not see 6. At the toll you name, 600 vehicles returns the Trust £310 the year, and the interest upon your own mortgage alone, at the rate the deed allows you, is 550. The thing is insolvent on the day it opens. It was built to be. It is not a road, your grace. It is a net, and you were to be the fish, and the marriage that was to be pressed on you this fortnight. She did not look at Sybil. She did not need to. The whole room looked for her, was the cord to draw it tight, for a son-in-law does not sue his wife's father, and a duke tied to the house of Southgate pays its debts to save his own name. My father paid another man's debt once, sir, to the last shilling, because his name was on the paper. I have watched what that costs a good man. I would not stand by and watch it done to a household that has been, her voice caught, for the first time and steadied, that has been kinder to me than it knew. The silence when she stopped was of a different quality altogether from the silence that had begun it. Esmond had drawn the papers to himself and was going down the columns, and the figures did precisely what she had said they would do, and would not be made to do anything else. He had a good head for money himself, better than most men of his rank, who leave such things to stewards and are fleeced for their laziness. He had sat through 100 wearisome hours with land agents and lawyers, and he knew a sound account from a sick one when he saw it laid open. He saw now that this one was mortally sick, and that a poor schoolmaster's daughter had diagnosed it in an afternoon's copying while men paid £500 a year to advise him, had smiled and passed the pen across the table. He was aware, as he checked her reckoning a second time and found it true to the last shilling, of a strange hot pricking behind his eyes that he had not felt since he was a boy. She had done it in her head. She had stood accused of theft with the constable half summoned, and the whole cruelty of the county ranged against her, and she had put her own ruin entirely aside as a thing of no present consequence, and bent quick, unhurried mind to the saving of him. Mr. Cardew, said the Duke, without lifting his eyes from the deed, you drew this instrument. Is the lady's construction of the third clause correct? Southgate's attorney had been the colour of tallow for some minutes. He wet his lips. Your Grace, the phrasing is technical, and a lady, however clever, cannot be supposed. Is it correct? It is not incorrect, your Grace. He got it out in a whisper, and it was enough. It was more than enough. A low sound went round the room, the sound of 8 or 10 of the county's best, understanding at once that they had watched a governess in a mended gown read a peer of the realm to the bone, and that she had been right, and that the peer's man had just confessed it. Lord Southgate was talking loudly of insolence and blackmail and actionable slander, and a scheme got up by a designing servant to escape her thieving, and it availed him nothing, for no one in the room was listening to him any longer. They were watching Joan Salter, and they were watching the Duke. And the two things had somehow become the same watching, and it was into the wreck of Southgate's bluster that Esmond finally lifted his head, and when he spoke it was very quietly, and the quiet cut clean through the noise as his shout could never have done. And the necklace, he said. Joan looked at him then, and something passed over her tired face that was almost a smile and almost the end of hope. I did not take the necklace, your Grace. But you have only my word for that, and my word is a poor woman's, and you have learned, you told me once, to hunt behind such words for the hand upon the strings. So I will not ask you to take it. She paused. I will only say that the Duchess's diamonds were not out of this house at all. Mrs. Dunn keeps the plate-room key upon her own person, and the coffer has not been to the jeweller since the mourning was put off. Whoever laid them in my box took them from within these walls not 3 days since, and carried them up the west stair past my door. And there is one lady in this company who came to the schoolroom uninvited on Tuesday morning to admire, she said, dear Amelia's progress, and stayed but a moment, and touched nothing, she assured me, though I found my coffer's lock scratched bright after. Now at last she turned her head, unhurried, and looked full at Sybil Southgate. You should have oiled the pick, Miss Southgate. A new scratch on an old lock tells its own tale to anyone who troubles to look. But then you have never had to look after your own few things and did not know. Sybil Southgate's fair face had gone from white to a mottled scarlet, and she rose, and she reached for the injured, silvery laugh that had carried her through 100 drawing-rooms. This is absurd, this creature will say anything, and got no further, for it was her own maid. Standing frightened by the door among the servants, who broke, a thin girl who had plainly weighed her mistress against the constable and the Duke's cold eye and chosen, in a rush of terror, not to hang for another's spite. It came out of her half-sobbed that Miss Southgate had bid her carry the box up and say nothing, that she had not known there were jewels in it, that she was a good girl and had a mother and it did not need finishing. The room finished it. Esmond stood among the ruin of the thing they had built to destroy her and found that he was not looking at Sybil Southgate, nor at her purpling father, nor at Lady Markholt, who had discovered a sudden intense interest in the rings upon her own hands. He was looking at Joan, and he was thinking, with a clarity that scalded, of a schoolroom by one candle, and of a book with a dead man's love written in the margins, and of his own hand laid 2 inches from hers across a deal table, and of the promise he had made her on the stairs, my word, which you have taught me to think is worth something, and of how, when the moment came to spend that word in her defence, he had for a dozen heartbeats kept it in his pocket and let her stand alone. She had saved his house with the same breath in which she bore his doubt, and she had let him go. She was letting him go now. He could see it in the way she gathered herself, gently, the way a person gathers herself at the end of a long day's work that is finished whether it was thanked or no. You will all of you be gone by noon, the Duke said to the room, without heat, which was somehow more terrible than heat. Southgate, my attorneys will wait upon yours. Lady Markholt, you will not trouble yourself further about the ordering of my house, nor the mothering of my daughter, nor any matter of mine whatsoever, so long as we both shall live. There is the door. I need not show you which of my servants is worth the whole freight of you. For you have this half-hour been shown it, and will carry the knowledge, I hope, a long way. And they went. There is no dignity to be got from a routed advance, and they'd not find any, and the great room emptied of them by 2s and 3s into an appalled and murmuring hall. And the diamonds lay forgotten on the green baize, and the fraudulent deed beside them, and it was over. But when he turned, she was going too. She had made her curtsy to him, correct and complete, the curtsy of a governess to a duke, and she had taken up nothing, for she owned nothing in that room. And she was walking, straight-backed and steady, toward the smaller door that gave upon the servants' stair, and he understood with a lurch of pure animal fear that she meant to go up and pack her 3 books and her mother's hair and walk out of Westdale, as she had walked into it, on her own 2 feet, owing no one and asking no one, because he had doubted her, and being proved clever was not the same as being believed, and she would not stay in a house to be a marvel where she had wished, once, only to be trusted. Joan, he said, not Miss Salter, her name bare, for the first time, and it stopped her with her hand upon the door as his own hand had once been stopped upon another, and when she did not turn he was already moving, around the long table, past the ruin of the diamonds, faster than a duke had any business moving in his own library, because 35 feet of Turkey carpet had never in his life looked so much like a thing that might, if he were slow, close over her head like water and take her from him for good. He found her in the stable-yard at first light, and the finding of it undid the last of what he had left of himself, for she had got no further than the mounting block, the same worn step of stone where he had first seen her, a grey stranger in the rain, asking him nothing, and she was standing beside it with her box at her feet and her bonnet strings tied, waiting for the carrier in the raw dawn as a person waits who has learned not to expect that any door will open behind her once it has shut. The frost was on the cobbles. His breath went up white and ragged. He had come out bareheaded and without his coat, a duke in his shirt sleeves in a stableyard at 6 of a January morning, and he did not care, and the not caring was itself the measure of how far the wall had fallen in a single night. "You will not take the cart," he said. It came out wrong, hard, an order where he had meant a plea, because the iron was the only voice his throat had ever been given for the things that mattered most, and he heard it land on her like one more coldness in a season of them, and he saw her chin come up. "I think I must, your grace," she said. "The letter is proved false. Pell was good enough to bring me word of it, and I am glad past saying for the child's sake and for the sake of plain truth, which I have always loved better than my own comfort. But a house that could believe it of me on a folded paper is a house I cannot keep my dignity in, and I have very little else. You would not have me stay on sufferance, cleared but watched. The woman it was thought might have done it. I would rather the cart." No. He came across the cobbles and stopped short of her, close enough to see the cold had reddened the rims of her eyes or something had. "Hear me first. You may take the cart after, if after you still wish it, and I will not stop the horse. But you will hear me first, because I have never in my life said aloud the thing I have come out here to say, and if I do not say it now before you drive off I shall carry it unsaid to my grave, and I have carried one thing unsaid to a grave already, and it has cost me 7 years. She was quiet. She did not help him. It was one of the things he had come, in these last weeks, to love past reason in her, that she never rushed to fill a silence a man was struggling to cross, but stood in it with him and let him find his own feet, which is a rarer kindness than speech. "I read a letter yesterday," he said, "in a hand made up to look like yours, and I could not tell you from a dead woman. You saw it in my face. You have never yet been wrong about my face, and you were not wrong then. I stood on my own hearth with the forged thing in my fist, and I let it strike me where I have been struck once before, and I did not look at the fold. You told me to look at the fold. You told me plainly, standing accused in the middle of a room got up to break you, that a paper carried flat in a lady's reticule is not creased like a paper walked upon, and it was the truest thing said in that room, and I could not lift my eyes from the loops of a false letter to see it. His voice was not steady. He let it not be steady. It was you who unfolded it in the end. Not I. From across the county in a carrier's inn you sent Pell the one line that turned it, that the fold be measured against the crease of Miss Southgate's own glove paper, that her sister be written to in Aldecott under a borrowed name, and the copyist found who was paid to counterfeit your hand. A mind like that, Joan, a mind that could see the whole machine while it was being crushed by it, and name the pin that would fly it apart. And I had it 2 floors above me for 3 months, and I paid it £30 a year to teach my daughter her letters. I did not do it to be admired," she said, low. "I know it. That is why I admire it." He drew a breath that hurt him. "Sybil Southgate is gone before her breakfast, and my aunt handed her into the coach herself, which you will understand is the county's whole language for a ruin. My aunt, who warned me against you, and who sat at my table this morning and said, being an honest woman under all her iron, that she had lived 70 years and been made a fool of by a pretty ambition at the last, and that the schoolroom drab she had scorned had more sense in her stained fingers than the drawing-room had in all its silk. The diamond is back in its velvet. The maid who was paid to hide it in your stocking has confessed it. Every wrong of it is righted, and it is righted because of you, and none of that, none of it, is the thing I came out into the cold to say." He saw her hands tighten on the ribbon of her bonnet. "I want none of it as your restitution," she said, and now her voice did shake, for the first time in all the months he had known her, and the shaking of it went through him like a blade. "Do you understand me, your grace? I will not be paid back. I have watched you these 3 months set right many things with your purse and your name, and they are good things, and I honor you for them, but I will not be one of them. If you have come to make amends to me, to square the account, to give the wronged woman her due, because your justice is sore over how near it came to failing, then let me take the cart, for I could bear the county's cruelty better than I could bear being your good deed. I did not want your rescue. I never once wanted your rescue. She stopped. She had said more than she meant, and the stopping of it hung in the frost between them, and Esmond, who had spent 7 winters learning never to walk toward anything unarmed, walked the last 2 steps toward her with his hands open and empty at his sides. "Say it," he said. "For God's sake, Joan, one of us must, and you have been braver than I every hour since November. Say what you want, and I will answer it with the only true word I have left in me." "I want the man," she said. Her eyes were full and did not spill. "Not the Duke. Not the roof, nor the name, nor the standing above the women who mocked me. I would sooner scrub a schoolroom floor I had chosen than sit a duchess I was given out of guilt. I want the man who passed his own child the honeycomb down the length of the table with his own hand, because he could not bear a footman to come between them. I have wanted him a long while, and told myself I might not, being what I am, and I have folded the wanting up small and carried it flat where no one would find the crease of it, and I will not be given him as an amends. I would rather want him from Aldecott the rest of my life than be handed him out of a sore conscience. There. Now you have it, and it is not seemly, and you may put me on the cart." And Esmond, Duke of Westdale, who had not wept since he rose off the floor of a dead woman's dressing-room a different and a colder man, felt his face break at last, and did not turn it away from her, because turning his face away was the whole architecture of the ruin he was done with. "Then you shall have the man," he said, "for the man is all there is, under the rest, and he has been counting the days to your door the way another woman once counted his rents, only I could not see it, for the counting was the opposite thing. She tollied me toward my death, and I have been tollying myself toward my life, and I did not know the name of it until you knelt on my hearth and gave my daughter back her voice, and would not give me the courtesy of a curtsy going out, which was the most honest thing anyone has done in my house in 7 years. He took her cold hand off the bonnet ribbon and held it in both his own, and it was the first time he had touched her, and neither of them had breath for it. "I am not making you amends. Hear the difference and hold me to it. Amends I make with my purse to people I have wronged and will then be quit of. This is not that. This is a man who kept his rooms cold so that liars would not linger telling you the fires have been laid in every hearth of this house since an hour ago, and lit, and that they will burn as long as you will consent to warm your hands at them, not as governess, not as amends, not on sufferance nor watched as my wife, if you will have me, wanting the man, for the man is standing in a stable-yard in his shirt with your hand in his, and he has nothing else to offer that you would take, and everything else to offer that you would not." The carrier's cart came round the gate then, the horse's breath smoking, the man touching his hat, and it stopped and waited, and Esmond did not let go her hand. And Joan Salter looked from the cart to the man and back again, and then she laughed, a small broken laugh that was half a sob, and said, "You will catch your death, standing so," which was he understood, and would understand better every year he lived beside her, her whole yes. Given as she gave everything, plainly and with care for him, and without one wasted word of ceremony. "Send it empty," Esmond to the carrier, over her bent head, and the man, who had carried boxes for the Dukes of Westdale 40 years, and had never once been spoken to by one in his shirt-sleeves, sent it empty, and the cart went out the gate without her, and it was the sweetest sight Esmond had seen in the turning of a lifetime. He did not marry her in a corner. That was the thing he found he could not abide, that she should be got quietly to the altar as a thing half shameful, the servant a duke had stooped to, the county tittering behind its gloves at the schoolroom duchess. So he did it in the plain and public sight of every soul who had scorned her. He gave a dinner 3 weeks after, and asked to it the very faces that had folded their fans over her poverty in November, the Cardews, the neighbouring gentry, his aunt enthroned and grimly delighted at the head of it all. And when they were seated he brought Joan down not in borrowed finery, but in a gown of her own choosing, grey silk the colour of the stuff she had first come in, chosen on purpose, he knew, so that no one should be able to say the finery had made her. And he stood at the foot of his own table and said, before them all, that he presented to them the future Duchess of Westdale, who had come to his house the 31st of 30 women, and the only one of the 31 who had told him a single true word. That 30 had come and told him what he wished to hear, and been forgotten by morning, and that the one who had told him what he did not wish to hear, plainly at cost to herself, standing in a wet gown by a mounting block, was the woman he had asked to be his wife, and the mother of his child. and that any person present who found the match beneath the dignity of his name misunderstood, and profoundly, where the dignity of his name had come from, for it had not come from its diamonds, one of which had been stolen and recovered and taught him nothing, but from its truth, of which he had possessed very little until a poor woman brought some into his house in a darned grey stocking and would not be frightened out of it. And he watched the faces that had scorned her rearrange themselves into the county's careful admiration, which is scorn with a better coat on, and he did not mind that it was insincere, because Joan, beside him, was not looking at them at all. She was looking at the child. For Amelia had the head of the table too, that night, in white, swinging her feet, and when her father had done his speaking, she said, into the grand hushed room, clear and unafraid, "Is Miss Salter to be my mamma now?" 3 words strung after another into a whole plain question. The mute child of 14 silent months holding a table of gentry with a sentence, and the room laughed, and was moved, and Esmond bent and told her gravely, as one tells an ambassador, that she was, and the child considered this with great seriousness, and then said, "Then may I have the comb of the honey at the wedding, and not the pord?" And it was Joan who answered her, leaning across, low and merry, "You shall have the whole comb, brave one, and I will fight the bees for it myself." And the child laughed, and Esmond sat between the two of them. The woman everyone had overlooked, and the daughter everyone had given up, and felt the 7 winter cold go out of the last room of him for good. They were married before the spring was well in. He gave her, for a wedding gift, no jewel. She would not have worn the recovered diamond, and he loved her the better for it. But the schoolmaster's Latin grammar she had carried in her box through all her poverty, rebound now in green calf with her new name stamped in gold, Joan, Duchess of Westdale, above the old thumbed pages she had learned her mind from. And she held it and could not speak, which from Joan was the fullest speech of all, and he understood that he had at last found the one gift a duke's purse could buy that was worth the giving, which was a thing a woman already loved, given back to her honoured. The stone that had nearly ruined her he had set, quietly and without telling her, into the making of a school in the parish she had come out of, a plain grey building where poor children should learn their letters and their figures free. That the cold Dutch diamond which had been used to break one clever, unregarded girl might buy the raising of 100 more, and when at last she found it out from Pell, who could keep nothing from her, she wept as she had not wept over any wrong done to herself, and told her husband he had understood her better than she had known how to be understood, which he counted, ever after, the highest wage his long courtship of her had earned. Years after, and there were many years, warm ones, and other small feet on the schoolroom stair, and the fires kept lit in every hearth, as a standing joke between them and a truth beneath the joke. A young cousin newly come into the county asked Esmond, over the port, how a man of his sense and his caution had come to marry so far beneath the expectation of his name, and the Duke of Westdale, older now, grier, easy in a way the county had long since stopped finding strange, looked down the length of the same table, where the winter sun still laid its long gold bars, to where his wife sat with a book she was 3 languages deep in and a child asleep against her arm, and said only this, that he had interviewed 30 women for his household, and every one of them had told him he was deep and wise, and not to be managed, and that the 31st had told him he was lonely, and shallower than he fancied, and managed to the hilt, and had been the only one of them who was telling the truth, and the only one who, telling it, had plainly not enjoyed his wincing, and that a man who has been lied to sweetly by everyone he trusted learns, if he is lucky and very late, to reckon the whole worth of his life in the one voice that will tell him plainly when he is wrong. And he raised his glass down the table to her, and she looked up over the top of her book and saw him do it, and did not smile the county's smile, but the other one, the plain one, kept these many years for him alone, and the once guarded Duke, who had built a wall 7 winters thick and let exactly one grey figure through it, thought that he had chosen right at the last, that of all the 30 polished doors that had opened on flattery, he had walked through the one that had told him the truth, and found behind it everything the flattering ones had promised and none of them had held, which was a warm house, a whole child, and a wife who loved the man and had never once, in all the long good years of it, wanted the Duke.